Please help me in welcoming the CRC's distinguished speaker for spring 2015, Professor Lev Manovich.
So thank you guys so much for inviting me. I'm deeply honored and deeply nervous. So I spent most of my academic career in California, and then for some strange reason took a job in New York. People said, Lev, are you sure you want to do it? It's like weather is terrible, and like, okay, anyway. But it gives me opportunity to visit Boston, which I think is just this one amazing huge campus where I think there's more smart people than any place around the world, even California. We have lots of smart people, but we're really spread out, right? So if you want to see a friend, you have to drive for like 7 hours. But food is better. Anyway, sorry. Well, I mean, I'm sure you decided to invite me, so I will basically keep insulting over time, right? So anyway, so mostly what I'll be doing is kind of showing you pictures, in fact, millions of pictures, and commenting on them. I do have some theoretical points to make as well, but I'll reserve it to the end, because if I start with theory, you know, by the time I get the pictures, everybody would leave. So we'll start with dessert first. So you know how in the 60s we used to say, you know, don't trust anybody after 30. Maybe this day you should say, don't trust anybody who doesn't have Instagram account, or don't trust anybody who doesn't know what Instagram stick is. So, you know, you guys all use social media in one way or another. Whether it is, you know, Contacti, you know, Weibo, maybe the strange American things like Instagram and Twitter, which some people use, right? So social media has become, you know, a really big part of your generation. And when it first started to happen around 10 years ago, so 10 years ago, in fact, when these things have emerged, because in 2005, I mean, you already have Flickr, which I know now you think is something for your grandfather, but it was the original Instagram, you know, and still very useful resource. Even also in 2005, it became possible to add images to a website. So suddenly, you know, the web to your blogs, right? So suddenly, you know, the blogs become visual, and we have this amazing period where we human beings, right? In fact, billions of human beings are sharing without pay, where ideas, inspirations, you know, cultural, social preferences, behaviors, and already hundreds of thousands of researchers have been taking advantage of it, because all the key social media websites, you may not know of it, but all of them, including, of course, you know, YouTube, Flickr, Instagram, Google, provide a mechanism called API, which is maybe the most important word for your generation, even though probably most of you don't know what it is, right? You guys are API generation. So API is what allows researchers and also other companies to download social media that you share on these platforms. You know, so for example, you know, every time you use some third-party app on your phone, let's say to interact with your social media accounts, it uses this mechanism called API to interact with, let's say, Instagram and Google and YouTube and so on. But the same mechanisms allow researchers such as myself, but also hundreds of thousands of researchers, I don't know why it's doing it. I disabled everything I can, but must be some second button, to actually download what you guys share, right? And then see if we can look at, you know, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, millions, and why not trillions, why stop where, of images, as well as text, you know, and other types of social media content, and see if we can use this as a new kind of instrument, right, to observe life on Earth, right? So imagine I'm some alien being. I probably look like I sound like one anyway, you know, with my strange Russian California accent. So who the fuck knows what the result is? Very strange, right? But people, when I go to Moscow, people like immediately like, okay, you know, we know you're like, we're from San Diego, like we know right away. Right, so imagine I'm, you know, sitting on Mars, or like really far away, right, even further somewhere, and you know, before like, you know, it's like 1950s, I would be reading like newspapers, you know, let's say I'm some American political scientist, 1950s, reading Soviet newspapers, trying to figure out what Stalin is doing. Well, now I can read social media, right? So in a certain sense, the perspective which we adopted in our lab is that of an alien. You know, alien is a very good researcher, right? So alien, because alien, right? Doesn't know anything about, there's no sense of context, and just trying to understand what are the strange beings on the planet Earth? What are we doing? What we're falling in love? We're buying Instagram sticks. We're having really bad sushi in their, I don't know, university dining facility, whatever, right? What are people actually doing? So more seriously, right? Can we use the masses of visual imagery, images but also video, people share on social platforms around the world as a new kind of microscope, as a new telescope, as a new lens, to try to say something new, to try to understand in new ways the social and cultural life on our planet. Okay? So that's the goal, and I will take you through just a few projects selected out of dozens of projects we've done in the last 8 years. Now, before I will take you through our three, in fact, most recent social media projects where we all use Instagram, I want to take a detour, and I want to show you one of the tools we built about 5-6 years ago when we just got started. Because when we said, okay, we're going to collect millions of Instagram photos or Flickr or YouTube videos, Vine, what have you, and we want to look at them. But how? So it turns out with 200 years of statistics and data visualization software, everything from Google Docs and Excel, processing, R, SPSS, and all this other strange 70s, 80s software with strange military acronyms, right? I mean, I would never trust software called SPSS, right? I know about you, but I mean, R, I can get behind R, right? So, so people develop these techniques and software to make sense of numbers and also categories, right? Remember your statistics class, data can be categorical, but the software doesn't really help us if we want to make sense of images. So if I want to look at, let's say, all the images shared around Boston University campus in the last year, maybe I want to divide them, by different types of students, or maybe I just simply want to see if there are some interesting visual clusters. There is actually turned out to be no commercial open source software to do it. So all of a sudden, we were in the business of building software tools, but also just figuring out how to do it. And the idea, which we came up with, which of course we borrowed from somebody, so we borrowed it from a particular branch of statistics, which only developed in the 1970s by specifically a person called Tarski, who was also behind development of R, which is now the most common language for data science. And Tarski was working in the 70s when it became actually possible to use interactive computers to look at data. Right? And he said, guys, the problem of you, all of you, statisticians, social scientists, all of you, right? You immediately start testing something. Testing, hypothesis. What the hell? Why don't you just look at the data and see what's where, Like what's the landscape of the data? Maybe it's much more interesting, Maybe you'll actually get some new ideas, original ideas. Don't test later, tomorrow. So how do you look at landscapes with millions of images? So Tarski said, well, he was dealing with numbers, right? So Tarski said, well, if you actually want to look at a bunch of numbers, what you want to do is you want to visualize it, right? Bar plots, pie charts, scatter plots, very familiar. And you want to kind of look at your data from every possible point of view, right? So let's make a bar plot or histogram of every variable. Let's make a scatter plot of every 2 variables, and so on and so forth. So we said, great, fantastic, thank you, Mr. Tarski. Let's steal your idea and apply it to images. So we decided to start building tools. And first I'll show you one of the interactive tool we built. And then, I will actually show you projects where we can use this idea, which we tested with interactive tool. So the idea is that once we have a collection of images, we're going to simply look at it from every point of view, sort it, rotate it, what have you, to see if some interesting patterns are going to appear. And to, as I said, before we go to this Instagram project, which I'll show you in a second, I will first show you a little video, which is kind of old, but it's from 2009, where we first got our basic tool working. And as you'll see, the tool is using not just a desktop or mobile phone, but the tool, in fact, is using a next-generation visualization wall made from dozens of separate monitors. And all we're doing is just kind of displaying the data, displaying images as a kind of scatter plot, but just as you would do with numbers, sort of sorting and rotating our display by different variables. Now, this demo doesn't use social media. It uses a very small data set, which are about 180 paintings of a very famous American mid-20th century abstract artist Mark Rothko, but then you'll see how we can use the same idea in relation to social media imagery on a much larger scale. Yeah. Okay, so basically we have a wall, right, which has 70 30-inch monitors. Behind the wall there's a bunch of PCs with high-end graphics card. So what we're doing is we have loaded, all the painting, a set of paintings with artists, and then we're interactively creating a set of scatterplots where each scatterplot is positioning these paintings according to some variables. And the variables, some of these variables is something like dates, for example. So here we organize images by date. And then we sort them, right, where the x-axis continues to be date, but y-axis corresponds to different visual features of these paintings, which are numerical characteristics, numerical statistics we extracted by using computer vision software. So basically, we're measuring properties of these images, and then looking at the distribution of these properties in relation to each other, but also in relation to date. We can also, as you can see, for example, blend everything, so we can focus on particular images. But Jeremy, who doesn't have my strange accent, would have been able to tell you much better, but it all worked before break. So you can, for example, also take one image, zoom it out, look at this. And this was done about 6 years ago, where you have these monitors which have really big bezels. So now we have the same version of this wall, where the bezels are almost invisible. And let's say in 5-10 years, you can imagine just coming home and just spraying this kind of wall, monitor wall on your normal wall. And of course, if you want to study big data, particularly big visual data, you can never have a big enough display. So while phones and desktops are good for numbers, they're not very appropriate interfaces to study patterns in large image collections. Okay. So I hope you got some idea. Right. Luckily, I don't have sound anymore, so let's continue. So after we did these experiments and built this kind of tools, and we actually have a desktop version of these tools, which we distribute on our website, Software Studies. You can download them, you can do some of this work yourself. We finally started to apply it to social media images. So we've done a bunch of projects using Instagram. Why did we select Instagram? It's going to sound very banal. All Instagram images have very good property. We're all kind of the same, we're all square. So when you try to visualize it, it's much easier. If you try to visualize arbitrary images, they're very long. People make some very weird long images. So it's not just only because Instagram is very kind of popular, and everybody kind of has the same Instagram app, but also the data is just easier to look at. So I'll show you a few projects. So our first project was called Photo Trails, where we kind of put a basic question, right, up front. So how do you explore social media visual data, which contains billions of photographs shared by hundreds of millions of contributors? What types of insights can we gain from analyzing this massive visual universe? So what we did for this project is, it was a collaboration just with three people. All projects we do are collaborative. When you work with big data, it's kind of hard to do it yourself, just because things take time. There are millions and millions of records. But you don't need to be like Google or Microsoft. You can do it with a very small team. So in this case, it was just 3 of us. So Jay Chow was my undergraduate when I was teaching in the Department of Visual Arts, University of California, San Diego. So now he has a very high-paying data science job, of course, but he still helps us. And then Nadav Hodgman was a very smart PhD student in art history who also had technical skills. So 3 of us worked on this project for about a year. And using a single laptop, we downloaded 2.3 million Instagram photos from 13 global cities. And then we said, let's look at these photos and see what we can find. And because it was our very initial project, the first kind of technique, right, which we used was the same one, which I tried to show you, maybe not very successful in the video, right, simply taking these images, using computers to extract statistics from them, i.e. numerical characteristics of visual properties, for example, average saturation, right? So how saturated our colors are, What's the average number? Average brightness. Is it a dark image? Is it light image? Is it medium tones? Or how many edges were in the image? What is the size of the shape? All these characteristics which are part of a field called computer vision, which was developed in the late 50s, 1960s. And it's the same techniques which are used every day, for example, by Facebook, when it finds faces. Or when you're taking pictures with your mobile camera, it automatically follows the face and then takes a picture when somebody's smiling. It's all based on the same techniques. But we're adapting these techniques not as a way to sell you more ads or to catch you only when you're happy, but in fact to try to do research. So again, very, very simple techniques. So here we're looking at visualizations where we took equal size samples from 3 of the cities, and 4 of the cities, New York, San Francisco, Tokyo, and Bangkok. And this visualization of New York uses somewhat of a different layout, but San Francisco, Tokyo, and Bangkok use exactly kind of the same composition. And I call this technique, which I don't know if it was invented before or not, but we can come up with it in the lab and then develop a software to do it. I'll call this radial image plot. So essentially, what you have is, just a moment. Essentially, what you have, oh no, it doesn't want to. Interesting. Okay. Okay. Oops. Sorry, guys. It's just. Yeah. Let's try this again. Okay. Perfect. So essentially, it's actually a scatter plot, right? Except we take like y coordinate, and instead of putting it up, we actually rotate it, right? So the second coordinate becomes an angle. So the position of each image, so it's 50,000 images shared in Bangkok, for example, in the beginning of 2013, which is when we did data collection. So position of the image is determined by, again, 2 parameters, 2 statistics. One is the average brightness. So the darker the images, the closer we are to the center, right? And the lighter images are further away. And then the angle corresponds to average. In fact, this is average color, right? Average hue. So it's like a color circle. Okay? And it's interactive in a very simple way, but you can zoom in. One hopes. Okay. You have to be a little bit patient. And pan, and basically explore this visualization. Okay? And you can also go download any visualizations. You will get 6,000 to 8,000 by 8,000 images. You can play with yourself. Okay? Now, when I compare these 3 images, right, a very basic question emerges. So what do we learn here, right? Of course, what we learn is only as good as our tool, as our instrument, right? And our instrument is incredibly rough. So we're ignoring images content, right? We're ignoring who contributed them. We're ignoring lots and lots of things. All we're doing is, just as it was done in traditional statistics and social science for a couple of 100 years, is we're focusing on just only 1 or 2 properties and only 1 or 2 variables of our data. Right? So the result is as poor as usually the results are in social science, because you're ignoring everything else and only focusing on 1 or 2 variables. Right? Sorry, again, I'm being a little bit provocative, but I think that's what I'm here for. Okay, so what do we learn, right? Well, yes, you can do statistical testing, but you don't need it because actually statistical tests don't work with big data anyway, because every effect is significant because the data is big. So what do we learn, right? Well, you can say, actually what we found in San Francisco, Tokyo, and Bangkok, people have very similar images. Maybe because we're influenced by each other, we mimic each other, to invoke another kind of founder of sociology, Gabriel Tarde, or because we're using the same Instagram software, or maybe because we're using the same filters. So in fact, the colors are incredibly similar. Well, maybe this is simply the effect of particular very rough, very proximate instrument we're using because we're only comparing images by colors and brightness. Or maybe you would say this is actually significant, right? So the colors in Bangkok, in fact, where distribution is significantly different from one which is in Tokyo, San Francisco. Well, I'll leave you with these questions, but because I don't want to answer them, right? The point is not to answer any questions. The point is to multiply them. So when the second thing we've done, right, is we created these montages, which are basically one-dimensional visualizations, where you simply take all the images and you sort them by a single variable. Okay? So the easiest, the most obvious way to do it is to sort the images by where upload, date, and time. So when we download images from Instagram using API, we get lots of information, which is kind of scary. You get like usernames, you get links to user pages, but you also get upload date and time. And here, for example, right, we took about 50,000 images from Tokyo, right, and simply organized them in a kind of one-dimensional visualization. But of course, it looks two-dimensional because the images, wrap, right? We wrap around, so we go like this, right? The images go like this, like this, like this, right? Left to top to bottom, and then left to right, and they correspond to with all the images which we shared in the center of Tokyo over a few days. Okay? So this is Tokyo. So I don't know if you can see because it's very subtle, and of course the fact that it's subtle is what's interesting. You have this very nice kind of day-to-night patterns, right? Things get lighter during the day, things get darker during the night, but it's not obsolete because people don't, of course, only upload images which were taken in the in the same moment. You can also upload images from before, right? So you'll find some beautiful images of sunrise uploaded like in the midnight, right? Or images of your vacation, I don't know, in Miami Beach uploaded like in Boston, right? So it's not simply about present now. And then we can compare this image to, for example, New York, right? Which also has this very nice kind of day-to-night patterns, but because people share more images in New York at this moment, when in Tokyo, the same 50 images are only getting you about, right, a smaller part of this wave, so you only get them with 3 days. All right. So here, what I want to do is I want to kind of maybe introduce a larger idea. I promised that I will try to kind of talk about more theoretical ideas at the end, but at least I want to mention one of these ideas, this idea of representation, right? So can we use social media, can we use big data, not simply to answer, right, a kind of questions which we already have, or to simply do business as usual? For example, can we use social media to predict how people are going to vote in the next election? Well, you don't need to do it. You're not going to vote 50-50, right? Right? But rather, can you use social media perhaps to question how statistics in the social sciences, which have been using statistics, have been representing, right, kind of information about society and social, cultural, economic life over the last 200 years, right? So of course, for example, we can take these images, right? We can fit the curve, and we'll get a nice curve which will show you, how they vary day to night, and you'll be able to predict, for example, right, where these images are going to be in this bright to dark scale, let's say at any moment in the future, if you have enough data. But when you do this prediction, right, when you, again, to use this language, which was very popular for the last 200 years, when you fit the data with a model, right, you basically get rid of variability. You get rid of diversity, right? Variability and diversity is reduced to a little thing at the end of your formula called error. This is crazy. This is fucking crazy, right? Because what is interesting about us is very different, right? You're not going to date somebody who's 100% like you, right? You want to date somebody who maybe challenges you or compliments you. Well, maybe you want to date somebody who's exactly like you, but that's your problem, right? Yeah, right? Think about somebody like Darwin, right, who's coming up with theory of evolution in the 1860s, 1870s, exactly around the same time when modern statistics gets formulated and systematized, right? As life develops, both physical life, right, think about universe, biological life, think about biological evolution, but also cultural life, think about cultural evolution, to study anthropology, things become more complex. Things become more differentiated. Things become more varied. There is more variety, there is more diversity. And yet, the statistics and bad social science, there's lots of good social science, but bad social science, are trying to basically ignore this variability and diversity by just putting it all into things like, little error term, right? We're basically trying to only measure things which are regular, right? Because this is measurable, right? So statistics, probability, later complexity theory in 20th century emerged as a kind of Western society way to deal with unpredictable, right? To deal with stochastic processes, and also to deal with variability, right? By developing math which can predict things, but of course you predict things by making a very, kind of arrogant, right, to say the least, assumption that variety is something which is not a very good thing, right? Variability and predictability is not a very good thing. It basically just messes up our formulas. So, I kind of just planted this idea. I will come back to it at the end if there is time. But what I want to say here, what I find really beautiful and fascinating and actually most valuable, right, about this graph is not that it suggests that there is a periodicity and predictability, right, about social behavior. Yes, of course, people upload more dark images at night and people upload more light images during the day. But in fact, you can see that if you plot the images in this way, right, every pattern, right, every part of the wave is different. So depending on what happened on a particular day or night or particular hour in Tokyo, New York, Washington, or any other place, the part of the wave gets a little bit longer, or part of the wave gets a little bit shorter. So we almost see a kind of society, right, representing ourselves to us, right, in a full display, or let's say at least in a partial display with variability, diversity. It's almost like you're breathing, right? You're breathing, your heart is beating, and it's regular, but probably every heartbeat is just a little bit different from the rest. Every breath you take is a little bit different from the rest. So here we see the society kind of breathing, right? And this is being visible in this visualization. And notice we didn't have to do anything, right? We didn't have to manipulate the data. All we had to do is basically simply display it as is according to the date and time. Okay, so I planted some of ideas behind this work in this project, so now we'll go to the second one. And there's a particular trajectory, right? There's a particular trajectory in this project. Sorry, this one. So first, right, we said, well, we actually have no idea what we can find if we look at lots of images from social media. And we don't even know how to do it, so we're just going to start with photo trails. We're going to download 2.3 million images from 13 global cities, and using this very simple technique of exploratory data analysis, which we're kind of turning into something which can be called exploratory media analysis, we're going to compare with images and see, for example, if there are some significant differences, between different cities, right? So this, of course, becomes an interesting question in all these projects. I mean, are we going to find some cultural, social, ethnic, geographical differences in what we can see between different locations if we use visual social media as our tool? Or is the combination of kind of people following each other, mimicking each other, and people using the same interface, the same Instagram app, and applying the same filter, is the message of software going to be stronger, right, than the message of individual cultural, social differences? In other words, for example, if you look at the selfies, right, from different places, are we going to have any cultural, social specificity or gender specificity, or are we going to be just the same thing around the world? Right? So in order to continue asking this very basic question, right, what is the kind of tool things like Instagram can be, right? How much can we see? If we use Instagram, are we going to just see Instagram, or are we actually going to see through Instagram what is out there? We said, let's now focus on something particular, right? Because in the for the Trails project, we're just comparing apples and oranges and, right, all kind of images, so it's a little bit unfair. So for the second project, we decided to continue this idea of cross-cultural comparison, but we said we're going to focus on just one particular type of image. So we did various experiments. We look at food, of course, other popular subjects. Even my team, so I had a bigger team this time. Okay. So it includes, for example, some undergraduates. Here's Jay, here's Nadav, a PhD student, another PhD student in art history, and then this guy, he's a PhD, actually scientist, with a PhD in postdoc in computer science. So he's the only other full-time member of my lab. Even I'm also collaborating with three bearded, kind of Williamsburg-looking like gentlemen who happen to be like the world's leading kind of some of the famous designers. So it's a big team, right? All these people are just trying to figure out selfies. There's something very ridiculous about it, right? We had to assemble this like stealth team, right? And people said, Lev, so we decided we're going to do selfies. I'm like, no way! This is so banal. This is just so awful. My colleagues are going to hate me. I said, look, go away. Okay, just sign the check. We're going to do selfies. And we were so right, because in fact the project became very successful. Now, to some extent, it became maybe too successful, so I'll probably go into my grave as a person who did selfies. But the university loved it. In fact, my university raised my salary like 20% just because of this project, seriously. So anyway, so what we decided to do is we said we're still going to use Instagram, because by this time we developed a nice software. It took us a few months to develop it, to download all these Instagram images. And we're still going to compare images from different cities, but we will try to do selfies. Now, and the idea was let's try to use different tools, right? So in social science, there is this concept of mixed methods, which I just learned a couple of weeks ago. I've never even taken any class in social science in my life. Just like last week, I learned about linear regression. What a strange concept, But we'll talk more about it at the end. So this is very much mixed methods and probably no methods, and just a complete crazy party of methods. But one thing I have to say, it was kind of good idea to selfies. It was also a very bad idea, because it turns out it's very, very hard when you're looking at the photo to actually figure out if it's a selfie or not. Like in some cases, it's very obvious, right? You see somebody's hand and this distorted smile, right, with dark face. In some cases, it's very hard to say, if a person taking photo in a mirror, or maybe it's a friend. So we spent like 5 months trying to create a good data set, in a very kind of good social science tradition. And people say, look, you have Marilyn Monroe photo. What she's doing in your data set? Anyway, so we tried to kind of represent, right, this phenomenon of selfies in different ways, right? So this is just a very simple thing to simply illustrate a method. So here we have a collection of images from different cities, for example, Bangkok, Berlin, Moscow, New York, São Paulo. So we try to select one city from each continent. We also wanted to use Tokyo, but it actually turns out maybe because people in Japan are mostly using their own social networks, so we couldn't find enough Instagram, right, from Tokyo. And also when people take selfies in Tokyo, we're very evasive, we'll photograph there's only part of a face. So the computer vision algorithm was completely not working. No, it's okay, I don't want to try again. We already did a different part of the lecture, but thank you. Okay, I appreciate it. Thanks for coming. See you later, right? But you can also see how the method, which worked pretty well, right? If you look at these millions of images, if you look at these 50,000 images from afar, once you start looking, for example, at something which human brain knows really well, which is the face, right? Whereas a big part of your brain is distributed, but it's very big, which is all about face processing, right? So we're very sensitive to faces. You can see how simply sorting images by a single variable doesn't work very well. So you can probably guess, if you're really analytical, that the images are sorted, right, by the face orientation, right? So these faces are looking more, right? They're more kind of turning to the left. This is more turning to the right. But it's very hard to say that because you're paying attention to lots of other differences, right? So that's, of course, we see how this method becomes problematic, right, of simply sorting images by visual variables. Yeah, you can do it, but when your eyes really noticing all these other variables, right? With traditional statistics and statistical graphics, it's very easy. We got rid of everything else. We just take one variable, we reduce it to a number, and when we plot the number as a bar plot, and when you don't pay attention to anything else, when you forget we said something else, right? The society is just all about, race, class, gender, income, right? If you actually look at images, things are more complicated in a very delightful way. Now, if you want to imagine the evil computer, right, looking at this, whether it is the evil computer behind Facebook or evil computer behind, FBI or, whatever, sure, we can crop this, and we can even crop and rotate it. So this gives you a little bit of a kind of how computer looks with images, in fact, and what happens inside. So just to remind you that these things are not very innocent. So we basically tried these methods, and they didn't really work very well. So then we said, why don't we continue this idea of creating visualizations, which in fact very much look like conventional statistical graphics, but instead of reducing the data to a point, right, we're actually going to represent images as images. Again, just try to convey more the richness, the variety, the diversity and variability of social cultural world, right? So what we have is we made these histograms where images are sorted. So in this case, they're sorted by gender and age, right? So for example, this is images for Bangkok, right? So this is some of the youngest, and this is some of the oldest, so the age goes right left to right, and the gender kind of goes, right, with, with gender kind of goes, so this is female, this is male. So what you have is histograms, right? Something again you learn in your basic statistics class or your basic social science class, but they're made from individual images, right? So you get the sense, and again, this is, again, another kind of major idea behind this project is to try to create representations, right, which on the one hand try to extract a larger patterns, right, from this data, just as statistics have always done, but at the same time try to, not to hide, but try to represent the variety, variability, diversity, richness of this data, because as my collaborator said, an image is not a point, an image is a universe. Every image is like universe, so we don't want to hide it, and make it into a point. And then this is the same kind of histogram, but here we have smile distributions, and this is done by a latest computer vision algorithm. And again, you can look at this in a very anecdotal way, and here are little conclusions, which we suggested, right? But Bangkok selfies show a lot of smiles, but we didn't want to put this. We didn't want, how again, very much in politics or newspapers or media, people kind of right. We make the conclusions for you. This is bullshit, right? You guys are data generation. If I give you data, and give you tools to look at them, you should be able to make your own conclusions, right? And your conclusions may be different from your friend's conclusion, right? Don't let people who don't use Instagram tell you what reality is. How do they possibly know, right? So we try to suggest some things, but in a subtle way, ultimately just kind of preferring to show you the data. So what you see here, of course, but it's also very interesting anecdotally. So we can see people in Bangkok can get very, very happy, and people in Moscow, despite the fact that Moscow already has 20 IKEAs, like Moscow literally has like 20 or 18 IKEAs, but maybe it has to do something with Mr. Putin. But we collected data in 2013, and we just don't smile a lot, right? Anyway, so that was like another way, basically thinking, how do we display the data, which is visual? How do we display data without simply reducing it to bar chart, pie chart, and other things? And then they also did something kind of evil, in a sense. We said, we're actually going to pretend that we are people who work for something like Pew Internet Research Project, or people who work for some old-fashioned newspaper like New York Times. We're actually going to present our results as findings, right? Because ultimately, this is what adults, this is what people who don't use Instagram are going to understand. So the idea was, let's make this window, let's pretend that we're normal. So we attract more people to a website, and then they actually throw them something which is more abnormal, right? So this is the normal part, which is our main findings. So in purpose, we made this really boring looking, right? Very business-like, Imagine some bureaucrat taking a train from Washington to Boston, like in a black suit, already balded, right, with his laptop going to some Washington meeting, right? So that's the audience. But it totally worked, right? So the project was described in something like 1,000 websites and newspaper articles, CNN, New York Times, etc. And then some people actually had more visual aspects, which I'll show you in a second. So we found some things. Okay, yes, there is only 4% of images actually selfies. There are significantly more, women than men. People in Bangkok and Sao Paulo smile more. It's mostly young people. So this actually tells you also a little bit about the Instagram usage. Now, this was all determined using computer vision, which I'll show you in a second. And, some very, very interesting things. So for newspapers like in Brazil to write about, that women in Brazil are actually much more expressive, right, than other places. Good for them, right? Good for them. Okay, so we got all those people to come to a website, like 800,000 visits, I think, something in a year. And then, hopefully, we went and we clicked on actually part which is a little bit different, which is this part, called self-exploratory. So here, again, we continue this idea, is saying, on the one hand, we don't want to completely get rid of 250 years of statistics and 130 years of social science, right? There is something good about reducing the diversity of the world to a few variables and comparing these variables, right? Maybe you don't want to reduce it to one-party system like North Korea, Russia, or Cuba, or two-party system like America. That's maybe a little bit too much. But sometimes reduction is good, right? After all, this is how a brain works, right? You're looking at all the chairs, and then you have a concept of a chair, right? So if your brain was not capable of doing any kind of reduction of reality, you just go crazy, right? We basically lock these people up. On the other hand, we have these amazing fucking tools called computers. I can keep track of 8 billion people in the world easily on a single laptop. And I can have thousands of variables for every person. So when we reduce the social and the cultural world to just a few variables in a few categories, you are thinking as though you live in 1750. So if people are doing it, you know how you go to buy a suit for your boyfriend or something, and there's this pocket here for a handkerchief. Nobody wears fucking handkerchief for 95 years. You know, people are basically dreaming, right? People are sleeping. We're sleeping, now we're living like in 2015, but we're pretending we're like in 1815 or 1715. The same thing with statistics, social science, right? It's not some kind of strange pretense, right? People are using these amazing tools to think the way we were able to think in 1750 because we didn't have computers, right? So on the one hand, yes, let's keep some reduction, let's keep some summation, let's keep some summary statistics, but yet also let's see if we can actually show the whole data, right? So you understand it's not simply, you know, this mean versus that mean. It's not simply this variable versus this variable, it's something else. So we try to do it, you know, it's not hard, it's not easy because we don't have many precedents, so we're just experimenting, right? So here's one experiment, which is what the whole reason we built this project, right? So what we have is we have a combination of two types of software interfaces, right? On the bottom, we have like a media browsing, like a kind of Flickr or iPhoto, right? So by the way, you know, what we've done with this project, we started with we collected images in 6 cities. As I mentioned, Tokyo was, you know, not enough selfies, so we had to drop it. So at the end, we started with something about 700,000 images, but because actually it turns out there's only 4% of real selfies, by which I mean like a single person photographing himself or herself, we basically ended up about, you know, 5,000 images, and then to keep our samples equal, we basically reduce it to 640. So our whole data set is just 3,200 selfies, which is 640 selfies from each city, so it's very small. So here's the data set, you know, not sorted in any particular way, okay? So here it is, you know. And if you just look at this like this, I mean, it's really hard, right? It's really hard for your brain, right, to see patterns. You know how people tell you this lie? No, the computer is only good for numbers. It's stupid. It's only good for processing numbers. The brain is so good with patterns. It's a lie. You guys can only see patterns only if data is organized in a particular way, you know. Yeah, don't kid yourself, you know. Yeah. Okay. So here we are. Okay. And then here we have more like a traditional statistical display. But what we try to do is we try to connect the statistical display to the data. Right? So it's basically a way to kind of filter the data, right? But you still see the original data, you still have the original images. So what we have here is this, right? So here's the metadata. Here's the 5 cities from which we collected the data. And this is something which get directly from Instagram, right? From Instagram coordinates. So here's New York City. And you see I select New York City, and now I only see images from New York, right? New York, São Paulo, Berlin, Moscow, Bangkok. I can clear this, right? So here we have age, okay? You know, yeah, looks like very much a little histogram. So as you can see, you know, average is about 23, 25, which by the way, later I figure out that it's exactly the same average as the average of people who use, you guys use OkCupid, right? You know, dating application. You're not paying money for Match.com, right? Or like a mid-market called Tinder, right? I mean, intellectuals these days use OkCupid. Anyway, so OkCupid, you know, website was set up simply to collect data about people, right? You know, we publish this, you know, well, maybe, right? So we said that the average age was about 23, 24, which is the same age we found with selfies, so it kind of gives you some idea about maybe what people use selfies for, right? Anyway, and then here's people like me, past 30s, right? There are some of us, but really, oh my God, I'm like somewhere like, right? I don't even like appear, right? Anyway, so here's gender, female, male. Okay, so now the question becomes, how did we get to age, right? So we used 2 different methods. We used mechanical Turk, right? So we basically placed these images on Amazon Mechanical Turk service, and we asked 3 workers to look at each image and to guess the age. And we also use the state-of-the-art face analysis software, and the software also looked at the image, and the algorithm also tried to guess the age. The results were actually quite accurate. I mean, quite systematic, except the algorithm always told us the person was a little bit younger. Maybe because we wanted to sell the software. So if I put my image, it tells me I'm 10 years younger. Anyway, but it was good validation. Now with gender, of course, people criticized it. We said, Lev, what is this? Why you guys are so primitive? Why you only have 2 genders? We're like, yes, it was a mistake. We actually published an essay on the website by my friend, feminist media scholar Liz Losh, where she criticizes very accurately. But at least we have this question mark, where basically never computer nor person couldn't tell what the gender is. I mean, I know it's not as good as 40 different gender orientations Facebook now gives you, right? But it's okay, yeah. You know, the academics always behind. Yeah, here's an example. Okay, and then we have this other features which are extracted by computer vision, right? So things like pose, are you looking up, for example, right? Okay, are you looking down? You know, things like, for example, like eyes, you know, open eyes, closed eyes. Things like head turns. And also we got 7 emotion variables. And when I checked them, you know, yeah, it's not completely accurate, but it's not completely inaccurate, actually pretty good. And I think what's really interesting, right, and here's another very general idea which I want to throw in very quickly. I mean, the reason I'm so passionate about using computers as a new tool to study and to represent and to look at society and culture is that if you use language, right, which is traditional tool of humanities, the language forces you to describe everything using small number of categories. You know, people are white or black. Something is moving slow or fast, right? The language is not very good with describing gradations. But the computers which use numbers and visualizations which use numbers are very good at it, right? So for example, if I get this emotion, somebody is not just happy or unhappy, but you can have happiness index between 0 and 100, right? So potentially, again, it's a way to get rid of this heritage of modernity, right? Of modern kind of panopticon enlightenment societies, which kind of try to reduce the social cultural variability to few variables and use them to manipulate us. It's a way to maybe get back at a richer description of how our brain understands the world, right? But in fact, you're not just happy or unhappy, but there are gradations, right? So now, of course, you can play with games, right? You can say, let's select all the people in, I don't know, in Moscow. Okay, let's select all people in Moscow who are like really tilting their head to the right. Okay, okay, so it works. Let's select all the people, for example, in New York. Let's select all the guys in New York. And let's see who is the oldest. So you can do this part, right? Here we go. Okay, so it works, right? Let's select all the people in, I don't know, in Berlin who like really, who are very, very calm, who like who are very, very angry. Well, okay, so of course, after a while, the computer, the Turing test doesn't work. After a while, the computer is going to break down. So it's not, you know, it's not perfect. But the point was, it's not to make it perfect, right? It's not to get some findings, right? You know, well, not get some findings. The point is just to show you, is to experiment with how you can explore such a collection of images, both use a combination of variables, but also allowing you to see the images themselves, because the images are always going to have more information in them of whatever variables you're going to assign. And by the way, let's say you made some amazing finding. You said, here's all the people to the right, who are looking to the right, and we have their eyes, we have my mouth closed, and we may be like really calm, and, well, I didn't get anybody. Okay, let's try this again. So let's say, okay, here's all the men who tilting their head to the left. You say, this is such an amazing collection. Okay, let's date them. So let's say I want to send you a collection. So I can basically just say share, and you see I get this little string, and I can just send it to somebody else, right? And then I can kind of copy this, paste the string, and then you're going to get exactly the same selection. So it's also a very nice way you can communicate the findings, or like your intermediate findings back and forth. So if you see when I kind of pasted this, things got selected. Anyway, all right, so this was the next thing. So I still have to show you a couple of more things, and I always fall behind. Like somehow the more I lecture, the more I fall behind. I don't know why. You would think I'll get better, but this data is getting, like I'm getting better, but data is getting bigger, right? Okay, so very briefly. So this project is, I'll show very briefly, so it's probably most kind of political science relevant project we've done also last year. So this is the thing we did after selfies. We said, okay, that's great. But what if we kind of try to focus our lens even more, right? What if we kind of try to zoom in even more? So here, but instead of comparing only like selfies to selfies, why don't we just focus on a particular area of particular city and just collect everything and just see what's out there, right? What does the city feels like? What do people think about in relation to Instagram? But it so happens that we selected this window, this kind of time-space window, not just at any moment, but at the moment of revolution. Specifically, so-called Maidan or Euromaidan revolution, which took place in Ukraine, in the capital of Ukraine, Kiev, a little bit more than a year ago, in February of 2014. So what we've done is that we I made this project. Also was a collaboration of a few people, but I would say mostly was driven by me, so that's why it's not so pretty, because I can't make these beautiful interfaces myself. But I had more time to think about what I'm doing, which was kind of nice anyway. So even though this project is not as popular as Selfie City, it's my favorite because I did it myself. So what we've done is we basically collected all the Instagram images which we shared in a kind of center, right? In the center of the city. So here you see the collection area, 5 by 5 kilometer area, and we centered the collection period on February 17th and February 23rd. And in the middle of this period is when the confrontation between the protesters and various parties and police reached very extreme. Eventually, the president government ran away, the government which was backed up by Moscow, and the new kind of temporary government have set in. And they said, okay, so what are we going to find? Yeah? Now notice that this project is very different from a variety of very nice projects, which I very much respect, where people try to use it how activists and protesters and politicians and civil hackers, how people use social media, right? For example, how the social media was used in so-called Arab Spring, which, as we know, became very quickly Arab Winter, but it was exciting when it was happening, or Occupy Wall Street. So let's say if you want to occupy Wall Street, you're only going to download images or tweets which have Occupy, let's say Wall Street, or similar tags, which means that you're only looking for what you want to find, right? You're only looking for what you want to find, or you're only collecting the data which is already relevant to your research questions, right? Well, I think I have nothing against this basic idea that you have a research question, you construct your experiment or your sample, you collect the data, and when you analyze it, when you have findings, it's a very beautiful, very symmetrical workflow. But why not do things differently? Big data is cheap, right? You can go and you can download, right, millions of Instagram photos or billions of tweets. Yes, it takes a little bit of time, but not that much. And let's just see what's out there. So basically what I tell people, if you have research questions, you're already wrong. It means you're already limiting yourself to your research question, right? If you're going to get some findings, it's probably also not such a good idea because it probably missed lots of other interesting things, right? So basically what I tell people is that, what if you don't start with any research question? What if you don't start with any particular variables? I'm going to do my dissertation about, 19th century newspapers in Pittsburgh. I'm going to do my dissertation about 1950 experimental film. What if we just take all the data which is available about the world, about history, and just see what's out there? So data exploration as a kind of dominant method, as opposed to data exploration just as a way to see what's out there, even construct your real studies. So in this case, I had no idea. I said, yes, we want to see how social media has been used during the revolution, but beyond that, right, I have really no idea what to look for. I just want to see what's out there. And the result, I think, was very interesting, right? So here is the 13,000 images which we collected. So we collected all the publicly visible Instagram images, 13,000 images. And here again, we organized simply by upload date and time. So it's about a week. So you can see things get, right, higher and lower. And here on the right, I made a little annotation in Photoshop by simply copying key events of this period from the Wikipedia account. Okay, so if I show it to you, is there something amazing happen? Do you see revolution? No, you see nothing, right? So what was interesting, right? The original idea was, let's look at how people use social media during the revolution. Such a wonderful, such a fundable idea. And when we look at the images, we said, well, don't see any fucking revolution, It's just Instagram, It's just selfies. It's just, it's just shoes, It's just life, right? So as I work on this project for about six, seven months, eventually what the theme of the project became is what is the interplay between exceptional and the everyday, right, on social media such as Instagram. In other words, what happens in a city where revolution is happening, but what else is going on? Let's say we're sitting in this auditorium, right? And let's say like 2 miles from here there's a revolution, conservatives, take over White House or something, kill everybody. Very possible. But we're sitting here, we don't even know, right? And you're like sharing images of, latest Ubiquitous code with your friend, right? Only in retrospect, we say, oh my God, it was actually a revolution which took place, right? Anyway, so I will not kind of share, everything with you because I'm looking at the clock. But, if you zoom in this collage, that's what you get, right? So you get this wonderful, wonderful collage. So this is just zooming in on, in fact, the most intense period of fighting. And you can see, there are some images of fighting, right? Even next to it, you have just a kind of very crazy collage of everyday people activity. So every day kind of coexists, right, with exceptional. And you have to train yourself to actually see the exceptional. So, after a while, we figure out how to find it. So, for example, we said if you only look at the images right around the square, where revolution was taking place, which is the red part of a bar chart. Now you can see a pattern, right? There is nothing, and then there is more activity. And we did different things, right? So this is the square before. That's the square, that's this area during the events. So here's the square of the revolution. So basically, you can use various tools, right, to actually find it. But the point was to basically say, how did the city represent itself? How did the people who happened in the city, which of course includes journalists, tourists, and what was going on while this event, which for later will become what historians will be telling about this moment, right? So later what people will be telling about this moment in the history of Ukraine is the revolution. But of course, something is happening, somebody is protesting. How do you know it's going to become a successful revolution? What was going on? So the thing which I want to show you is out of all these visualizations is actually this one. So what we've done is we said, so how can we find how can we use computer techniques to find islands of similar content or similar visual characteristics, right? Similar type of photographic techniques, basically in this universe of Instagram images, because if you simply try to filter images by tags, it doesn't work. Because the same image can have 5, 6 different tags, Kiev, Maidan, selfie, love, follow me. So if we sort images by tags, it doesn't work very well. So we used a particular method from data science called cluster analysis, where we simply clustered images by actually, we didn't use anything sophisticated on purpose. So the computer doesn't know anything about content. We simply fed the computer pixel values. So images which have similar RGB values of pixels will get clustered into a similar area. And we basically told the computer to use k-means. Those of you who are interested in these details, just a very basic clustering method. We asked the computer to find 60 clusters. It did. Some clusters were complete garbage, nonsense, but some are very interesting. So here's a few of the clusters we found in this data set of 13,000 images. So here's one cluster, right? And what's interesting, you can say, well, that's actually nice. It's kind of poetic. It's this kind of cityscapes, right? Obviously, the computer doesn't know what these images mean. What the computer knows is that there's a part of the image which is dark, there's a part of the image which is light. But again, what's interesting is when I told you that humans really suck at pattern recognition, right? If I kind of show you the original 13,000 images, and you can zoom in into this, you'll be able to find, right, some similar things, but, okay, maybe it will, okay, it may not load. Okay, I think it's trying to load, but it can't. Anyway, but you will never be able to see something like that, right? So there's all kinds of interesting patterns inside your social media data, but you have to use computers to see them, right? So this is one interesting, interesting cluster. And notice you have these images which are really about the revolution, because we use this very specific Ukrainian flag colors, but they can masquerading, right, as a landscape of cityscapes. So here you have an image of, I think, sunset, but the colors we can manipulate it, right, to make it look like, a landscape. And here is also maybe image of a field. And here's, for example, another image we can find, another cluster we can find of just text. And here's another cluster of particular type of selfies, so on and so forth. Finally, Yeah, I saw a note. Let me show you the last one. Yeah, people always try to like interrogate you, right? And basically frighten you by showing these notes. There's 2 minutes late. Yeah, basically just ignore them, right? Just ignore them. Sorry, guys. Okay, so this is the latest project. So here we went even deeper. We said, okay, so we did selfies. We did simply 13 global cities. We did like one part of a city during revolution. What about one street? How would you represent a life along a single street in a city like New York using big data? So we made this project called On Broadway. It's available both as an interactive application on the web and also as an installation. I will simply kind of show you a video in a second, and then that will be the end. So we constructed Broadway by basically defining points along Broadway in New York. And then we defined points every 30 meters. And then we defined rectangles which are 100 meters wide. So it's a very, very narrow spine. And we said, how we represent, using data and interactive media, the life, right, the social, cultural life, and the kind of and the architecture, and the patterns of activity on the street, using a combination of different data sets, right? So this is some of the experiments. So this is, the kind of data we used. So basically, we had, it's described here somewhere. We had, I'm going to play this, right? So this is just a video which we shot from installation. Installation shown in your public library. So if you go to New York and if you're interested, you can go check it out. It's on display until next January. So we're using 10.5 million Instagram images shared in New York last year. So when we filtered this to Broadway, made it up with about 660,000, so 660,000 Instagram images. All the images which were tweeted, also during the same period. All the Foursquare check-ins for like last 4 years, so it's about 8 million. We also got hold of all the taxi ride data for 2013. So that was about 450 million. When we filtered it to Broadway, it was about 25 million. And also, for the first time, we decided to compare the social media data with economic and social data from US Census. So we're also using selected variables from US Census, income, education, ethnicity, immigration status, and so on. And I'm finishing the paper as we speak, so I can't really tell you what we find, but we actually have a real paper with real research questions and real results, which was provoked by this experiment. But ultimately, again, the idea was to, first of all, create the interface, and then if you plot all the data, right? So here's Instagram, Foursquare, Twitter. You get a very disturbing image of a city, right? You see how everything is synchronized. You can see how Broadway divides New York City into like two parts, which we call Broadway 1, Broadway 2. This is the tourists, this is the shopping, and this is the tourist landmarks, more income, and then this is the part where everything is lower. So we're actually using this awful thing called linear regression. Okay, just because why not, right? So I'm actually becoming more of a social scientist in front of you. But ultimately, again, the first idea was to say, okay, so here we have all these different, what people used to call variables, right? All these different kind of data layers. So how we can represent a smart city or a city of data out of these different data layers. And you saw a video. So guys, I think I'm a little bit behind with time. So I think that's going to be the end. I think I've thrown enough insults, which were just kind of very subtle way to actually express some more general ideas behind our work. Our work continues. I'm always looking for interesting collaborators. I mean, all these projects we've done in collaboration with graduate students. It doesn't matter where you are. So if you're good at something, or you think you want to be good at something and have brilliant ideas, send me an email. And what else can we find with social media? Is Instagram just a tool which will tell us about Instagram, or is Instagram a tool which can tell us about the world? What kind of work we can do in the next 5 years when we actually have not just people sharing social media, but also objects sharing their states. It's a very interesting, exciting adventure, right? It's a moment where everything you learn in school is probably wrong, and you can really completely rethink how to study society and culture. A good moment, I think, to study social science, only, of course, if you want to completely change it. Thank you so much.